Welcome to Ask Win, everyone. Today I have Mike with me, and I'm just going to let Mike take it away and start sharing his story with you guys, and then we'll take it from there.
All right. Well, Win, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. How things tended to start for me were from quite an early age because I've got cystic fibrosis and I'm also diabetic, which means that which means that my health has to be, I guess, a priority for me from an early age. So I had to learn about how to exercise properly. I had to learn about diet and all those things, and it became quite serious in that eventually it got pretty good in that I wasn't just the same as everybody else. I started to actually get better than average because of I guess the dedication that I needed. Had a massive payoff as I got older, but that meant that there was a part of me that I kind of felt like I had to give to people because of that. I spent so long kind of prioritizing myself that I felt like I had to balance the scales out a little bit. So my first business was tennis coaching, then it was personal training, and it all stemmed from wanting to help people and wanting to give back because I'd been helped so much and I felt almost a responsibility to do the same for others.
Well, that's awesome. Now, I don't know that much about cystic fibrosis, so would you be willing and able to share what cystic fibrosis is?
Yeah, sure. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic condition, so it's passed down sort of from your parents and grandparents and all those things. It affects the body in lots of different ways, depending on how severe it is. But for the most part, it means that your body produces too much mucus around the body, which causes complications. So
Okay.
for me personally, it's mostly my lungs and my digestive system. So I've got keep keep it at bay essentially, and do what I need to do to stop the mucus from building up all around everywhere. So it's a daily thing. It's some days it's a battle, other days it doesn't really affect me at all. But that's been my life since I was about 2 months old.
So I thought cystic fibrosis. I was always told cystic fibrosis affects the lungs more than it affects anything else. But you're saying it affects the whole body.
Yeah, it's a weird situation because it's also something that's degenerative, meaning that it gets worse as you get older, which is where the diabetes comes in. Because I was diabetic because of the cystic fibrosis. It's not because of my diet. It's not because the pancreas itself is struggling. It's because the mucus on the inside of the organ is stopping the insulin from being released properly. So it's something that you do get prone to as well. I'm not like a terrible position, but it's how your body reacts to what you do. There's only so much control you can have,
There's only
before.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
only so much control you can have, and I didn't realize that as a I guess I'm the dumb dumb that doesn't realize that as a along with cystic fibrosis, you could have other disabilities on top of cystic fibrosis because of the genetics and because of mucus and because of everything else.
Yeah, it's something that I guess unless you're in the know, it's not something you're aware of because you don't need to be. It's almost like a need to know basis almost whether you have that information. But yeah, it's something that you learn to live with. the cystic fibrosis is something that I've lived with my entire life, so it's easier. It's just kind of, well, this is your normal now. You're just different from everybody else. Whereas the diabetes was different because I was diagnosed when I was a personal trainer, when I was a tennis coach, and there was a part of me that, for want of a better expression, I didn't agree. I didn't want it to be the case. So I kind of fought back. I told the nurses and doctors that I want to try to change my diet to see if it made a difference. Because if you speak to anybody that understands what diabetes is, it's one of the things that nobody really wants to have. So
Yeah.
I was in that same boat. I didn't want to be diabetic, and if I could change my diet, then I would do it. So unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Despite the nurses going, yeah, we'll indulge you, Mike. We'll let you try your adjustments, and we'll see. I think deep down they knew what was going to happen, but they also knew that I wanted to try. I still am. I was a bit of a fighter, so it's like, nope, not happening. I'm gonna do my best, and it turns out I was. Which to some people, it's not a massive deal. It's not a massive thing, I guess, to have. You just make your adjustments, make your lifestyle changes, and you move on. But I was already doing quite a lot as it was because of the cystic fibrosis. I felt like my entire life was built around being as healthy as I could. And then the business and the work and all those things, that was something that I could do while maintaining my health. So the health bit came first, the business and making money and all those things that I had to stack on top of that. So it was just things to do on top of things to do on top of things to do. And when I was diabetic, it hit me a bit harder because I was also quite healthy. I didn't eat really, really badly. It was what my body was doing with what I was eating. I had no real control over it, which again, if I wasn't health conscious, I'd have just made my changes. If I wasn't having cystic fibrosis as well, I would have just made my changes and just carried on. It wouldn't have knocked me off my perch. But something else that really sort of changed everything for me was because I actually had a friend that had cystic fibrosis and diabetes before I was diagnosed. So if you picture it, I had CF, but I wasn't diabetic yet. And I had a friend that did. So he had the CF, he had the diabetes, and we got on. We couldn't spend too long together because we can make each other worse. We can cross-infect as well. So there's no cystic fibrosis support groups, right? They can't exist. So when this happened, we got quite close to the family, and unfortunately, he passed away, which means that, if you imagine you've got a friend that passes away with the conditions, then you're diagnosed. So there was a part of me that wondered if I only had a year left, because he was only a year older than I was. He wasn't like 70 or something. He was a similar age to me. So I didn't realize that it hit me as hard as it did until I started to really dig down into it when I started writing the book. But it made me think that I only had a year left. I only had a year left. I was diagnosed now. This is it. You're on a ticking time bomb now. What would you do with the rest of your life if you only had a year left? And there was a lot that went into it because I'm an introvert as well. So I'm quite an introspective kind of person. So I asked myself a lot of questions. I went through the whole grief process, personal trainer in the gym. Those workouts are some of the hardest I think I've ever done, trying to get rid of all the energy and all the anger and everything. And I genuinely thought that unless I made the changes, that I was going to be next. But then I was already doing so much, I couldn't really think of much else to do, because you need sugar and carbohydrates to exercise. So what was I going to do? Not exercise ever again? But then what about the cystic fibrosis? Like, I've got to keep that at bay as well. It's become a massive, complicated mess inside my own head. And even with the work as well, with the business, it was like, well, it feels really underwhelming now. You've only got a year left. Is it enough? Would you be remembered? Did you matter? What's the point of doing all of this if you've only got a year left? Where do you take this? Where do you go? What's the point? And for a while, I couldn't answer those questions. I couldn't answer what I wanted to do. I couldn't answer whether I mattered, whether there was a point. I didn't have that answer for a while until I realized that it wasn't about doing more. It was about going bigger. It wasn't about one-to-one stuff. It wasn't about little things. It was about bigger things. It was about, what would I do if I couldn't do anything else? What was that one thing? If I could really focus in, what is it? And all my personal training clients, they found out about my health conditions. They found out about my story through the media, to be honest, because I don't like people giving me an easy ride because of the conditions either. So if I'm as good or better than average, I don't want people to suddenly go, oh, we'll make it easier for him because he's got cystic fibrosis. So I spent a long time wanting to be normal, trying to be normal, and still stacking up reasonably well against everyone that didn't really realize what was going on. But when they found out that I had the conditions, then everything changed. They started to wonder if their excuses were worth it. So I haven't got time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you have, like you haven't got a lot to do with your day in comparison. So they started to motivate me to get me to share my story more, get me to put myself out there more. And that led to things like my own podcast, the book that I've written, speaking on stage, being on TV. It led to a lot of opportunities because I went after them. Because you've got to go after them. Opportunities don't come to you. You've got to go to them. Even like if you're established, you've still got to proactively go and search for them. It's very rare that you get an email in your inbox that says, hey, do you want to be on this TV show? It doesn't work that way. You've got to go out there and get it, even if you might get the odd email. So that really spurred my, I guess, life-changing moment. Okay, this has to disappear. This has to be a priority now because you don't know how long you've got left. You've got to commit to it. You really have to do this. So it's a form of, well, I call it mortality motivation, but it's not, because we can pass away at any moment, see? But the whole not knowing spurred me on into, okay, if you've only got this year left, you've got to make it worth it. You've got to live like you've only got a year left, because if you did, then you want to have better answers to those questions. Was it worth it? What's the point? Did you matter? Will you be remembered? All those things. I wanted better answers to them, to be perfectly honest, Win. I wanted better answers. And that's been my guardian light ever since.
So, okay, you were diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at a young age. And so, what if you could tell my listeners, what are the warning signs of cystic fibrosis?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it was diagnosed when I was 2 months old, which means, if my memory serves me, they are after the initial tests that you have when you're a baby. So when you're born, they do like blood tests and all those things just to see if you're healthy.
Yeah.
It came up on that. And also you did something called, I think it was the sweat test. So when you've got cystic fibrosis, you've got excess salt that's released when you sweat. So that was one of the main signs that doctors were like, yep, he's got cystic fibrosis because he has all these things and he's got excess salt in his sweat as well. So it was something that we didn't really realize because I was the firstborn. So my parents just sort of thought I would be healthy otherwise. I did fail to thrive as a child, so they wanted to know why that was happening. But my brother, who's obviously a bit younger than me, he had a bit of an easier way of, I guess, growing up, because they already knew what was going to happen. They would plan for cystic fibrosis, and then if it didn't have cystic fibrosis, because there is a chance of that, then it'd at least be healthy, because
Yeah.
they're preparing for the worst almost.
Yeah, they will. They hindsight is 2020, as they say.
Yeah, it is.
They they were preparing for the worst, and then they got a healthy child. And so, what has been your favorite episode of your podcast that you have done?
Well, my favorite has to be my number one, the first episode, because I do enjoy all my shows really deep down. I mean, if there's a topic that's repetitive, then I try my best not to feel that repetitiveness, but sometimes you can't help it. When it came to episodes, it has to be number one. It was my best friend, still is my best friend, and he was the one that encouraged me to do it initially. She said, "Look, I'll be your first interview. Get guests on as well. Do a bit of work beforehand, and you want to do the show anyway." It took me a full year, a full year to start my show because I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted everything to be right. I wanted all the software,
Yeah.
all the gadgets and the technology, and I was reading blogs and reading books and listening to podcasts myself, and it got so overwhelming because I wanted it to be right, wanted it to be perfect, and it was never going to be, because no matter what, I was never ever going to be happy. But yeah, first episode, number one, that would be my favorite if I had to pick one. But I like all the shows that I've ever done.
Yeah. So, first episode, number one. And then, what is the name of your podcast so that my listeners can go binge you?
Well, the podcast is the Ask Mike Show. So it's very, very similar to yours. So I answer questions. I have guests ranging from, I've got athletes, I've got actors, I've got singers. There's a lot that I sort of outgrew just business owners, because it started off as a business and self-improvement podcast, but now the self-improvement's taken over, and I'm bringing people from entertainment in to discuss what they do to sort of succeed at what they're doing. So business is always something that I've been passionate about from since I was 15. So it's been a long time since I've been in business now. But I realized that, people that perform, people that speak, people that act and do all those things, they're people as well, and I wanted to get a bit of an inside the head look at how these people do what they do.
And so, that is dead cool. And the funny thing is, you guys, um, that if Mike and I didn't have a podcast, we wouldn't be able to speak to half the people that we do.
No.
No, that's the coolest thing about the podcast is that I have spoken to more people and got my story out there just from me being on computer and just from me sharing my story, and Mike has shared his story from his end about his life and hopefully inspired others. Hopefully, that's the main goal, is to inspire others. And so, Mike, what is your favorite book?
My favorite book is The War of Art, which is a book by Stephen Pressfield, the author. Um, it talks a lot about resistance and how to overcome it. It's sort of context is to do with writing. So how to overcome resistance when it comes to writing, but it can be applied to a lot of different areas. I've read it multiple times. It's one of the only books that I've read multiple times because every time I read it, I feel like it refreshes my brain a little bit. And it's like a reminder that resistance is always there, no matter what level that you're at, resistance shows up. And it teaches you how to think about it and how to navigate that sort of mental process as well.
So, The War of Art. I love it. And so, if your best friend had to write a book about you, what would the title be?
The title would probably be The Art of Overcoming Adversity. I think when when you've overcame so much, very similar to yourself, it's something that some people think is a strategy-based thing, but it changes so often and it's so fluid that it becomes an art. It becomes integrating things in, and there's a little bit of a balancing act as well. That it is an art. It's not just a science, and I think that that would be the title of the book.
So, the art of overcoming diversity. And what is your morning routine?
My morning routine is a few hours long, actually. So I wake up, and then when I'm ready or I feel like I can, I then get out of bed. I I work out, I read or listen to podcasts, I have a cup of tea, I check to make sure that the world hasn't broke overnight because you work at different time zones. So there's a lot going on overnight that I'm asleep through. So I check that, check in with my friends and family, make sure they're okay, have a look at the diary for the day, have a look at the to-do list for the day, and then I get into it. I've got my breakfast ready, I've got everything all prepared, do all my medicines and treatments and all those things that I need to do for cystic fibrosis and being diabetic as well. And then that is it. I start my day.
And so, as we wrap this interview up, where could people find? Where could people find you?
Well, the best places to find me are on social media. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And the handle is at the Mike O'Brien. Then the podcast is the Ask Mike Show, which is everywhere from iTunes to Google and Stitcher and many, many other places.
And as we wrap this interview up, do you have any questions for me?
One of the questions that did come up while I was listening to your show is, what are some of the most important lessons have you had, dealing with your condition as well? Like what have you learned as a result of living with that?
Well, I was diagnosed like you at a fairly young age with cerebral palsy, and I'm on the quest to be diagnosed with asthma as well, which asthma is genetic. And so my big thing is go big or go home. My big thing is similar to yours, go big or go home. And if we don't do it all well, we can try again. And that's my big thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that I've realized as well, is that I probably wouldn't be as driven if I didn't have the conditions. The amount of, I mean, I used to be quite judgmental, to be brutally honest. People that weren't motivated, people that didn't really have that same level of drive or that same level of thinking. I used to ask them why, like, why would you not be motivated? And then I realized that, well, they've got nothing. If they've got nothing drive them, like a reason why or a real sense of I need to do this, it's very easy to not do things unless you need to do them. And you get better at it. You get better at navigating people that don't think the same way as you. Initially, I wasn't overly happy with people that thought like that, but now it's easier to just realize that I am different. I am wired differently, and in some ways, I'm actually grateful that I have the conditions, because I wanted that mindset. I want the ability to push myself and do things that I'd never done before. So in some ways, I want people to go through something, get to the other side of it, and then feel that change in them as a person that we've had. You know, it's very hard to recreate that other than going through something that's difficult.
Yes, exactly. And so, you guys, I hope you enjoyed another fabulous episode of Ask When. I hope you learned from Mike about cystic fibrosis. I certainly did. And I hope that you will tune into his podcast and get interesting on his perspective. And his podcast could be found everywhere, just like Ask Win. And I hope you guys enjoyed another episode. Thanks. See you guys. Bye, you guys.